Hello, everyone. I'm Torrey from the University of Nevada, Reno. Bob and I started doing these random discussions about, a month ago now, 3 weeks ago?
Emphasis on random, yeah.
Just kind of seeing that there was a need for a lot of us and a desire for us to collaborate and kind of hear what other institutions are doing during this time. So I felt like hearing from the Western schools in particular might help, because it sounds like a lot of our states are having similar discussions about reopening and bringing students back to campus. So I felt like this could be a relevant group in terms of collaboration and idea sharing.
Let me show my.
What was that, Bob?
Let me just show my funny picture, and then you can
Yeah.
run. So, and by the way, this group, I think, will always have a soft spot in my heart, because they were the ones that got the ball rolling on having chats on Zoom for me, really, other than the whole Meeting of the Minds conference. And a lot of my Western States friends I know from Meeting of the Minds, which was supposed to be on hand in Pomona right when everything was hitting the fan with Tom Hanks and the NBA and everything else back in November. So here's an update. Look, I've now just taken delivery of all these Meeting of the Minds hand sanitizers, which hopefully will be in Pomona next year. If not, I will mail it to you, probably with a pair of socks or something. And not only do I have this one, I have 800 of them. So somebody's getting together for the Meeting of the Minds next year, one way or the other. But we made that work, and this is really just another descendant of all the experience we had during that 1 week of trying to take an on-site conference and put it on Zoom, and we're still here. So anyway, I thought you'd all enjoy my Meeting of the Minds update. Fingers crossed. And Torrey, back to you. I'll keep letting people join us.
Perfect. And hey, if we don't end up meeting in person, you could probably make a lot of money selling that hand sanitizer on eBay. So, or on Amazon.
So
it's a hot commodity these days. So just kind of a quick agenda, and it's also on the left-hand side, but I think this is going to be more of a discussion. So at any point, if you want to be unmuted or have something to add, put a comment in the chat, and Bob or I will unmute you, and we can have a good discussion about things. I know a lot of us probably have more questions than answers during this time, especially as we are planning for fall and planning for our next fiscal year. So if you attended last week's session, we talked a lot about ending this fiscal year, and now I think it's a good time to start talking about what does the next phase look like? What is our reentry back to campus and back to normal fundraising, if there is a normal anymore? What does that look like? And so definitely we have a lot of poll questions today, and some questions that I think we'll just have a good discussion. And if you have answers to any of this, I know the CSUs, we have a couple of you on today. You were the first public institution and largest public institution that has announced, for the most part, going online in fall. And so that's a unique challenge at the University of Nevada, Reno. And I think also for our counterpart at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, our goal is to have students back, but in a hybrid model, where larger classes will be online, smaller lab-based classes will be in person, and then those kind of in the middle size classes will probably take the larger lecture halls and try to do social distancing with that. So a lot of scenarios happening. I will preface that we are having a phone-a-thon discussion next week, so we probably won't touch too much on phone today, just because we're having a dedicated discussion to that next week. So, yeah.
Torrey, just a reminder to use the chat button if you want to make a comment, if you want to talk, if you want to add any other links to stuff. We found that's a really useful way to sort of keep an eye on who's got something to contribute. So I'm going to be Torrey's wingman and just monitor a lot of that stuff while she has a nice discussion.
Yeah. So I think the first kind of topic that came to mind for me was a lot of us are doing student emergency fundraising right now, or COVID-19 related fundraising. And so we have a first poll question. If you,
I got it. I'm on it.
Perfect. And just a simple yes or no. Are you doing student emergency fundraising or COVID-19 related fundraising, or did you just decide to forego that? And I'm guessing the majority of us are probably doing that. And it looks like overwhelmingly yes. So as you guys continue to answer that, the next part of that question is, how do we continue fundraising for these? How do we pivot away from them and transition to our new normal and our new standard of fundraising? And what's that next phase? So for us right now, I'm planning on to continue highlighting these COVID-19 and student emergency fundraising through at least the end of this fiscal year, through June 30th. And then kind of assess what happens then. I don't know about you guys, but July is always the dead month for us in terms of fundraising and in terms of anything happening. So we don't do a lot of initiatives in July anyway. So I feel like that's a good time to regroup and figure out what does the next phase of this look like. I have a feeling the student emergency funds, there's still going to be a need for those well into the fall semester and as students return. Especially since housing is kind of that big unknown. If we're doing single occupancy dorms, if we're doing double occupancy, but I do not believe most schools will have quad or triple dorms. So that does leave a lot of students trying to figure out housing, which could lead to that student emergency. I know the libraries, for instance, is one of the top employers for students on our campus. And with the libraries having to really scale back in terms of social distancing, a lot of those students won't have that job to rely on in the fall. So a lot of students who would normally have campus-based jobs probably won't. So that's where that student emergency fund, I think, will continue. It's use other funds that are more maybe related to healthcare workers. I know we have one that's related to 3D printing and producing PPE. I don't know if that will be necessary after June or if our local hospitals are kind of good on all of that now. So would love to kind of hear if anyone has started thinking about that transition of what comes next. I know in a meeting that we had yesterday, we're thinking scholarship support is going to be that huge need come fall. And so we're trying to regroup and see what scholarships can have the most impact and kind of hit towards the masses of students that might be relying on those. And if there's any unique type scholarships that we can have in this situation. Another big area that we're considering is classroom improvements. A lot of classrooms are not equipped to do online learning or social distancing, and we're needing to put sanitation stations around campus, and we're needing to put wipes everywhere at every classroom. And so are we going to try to fundraise for campus improvements and classroom improvements that allow for us to continue instruction with social distancing and with taking so many precautions? So anyone have anything to add, or they want to chime in and discuss this? Jill's got something. Do you know the gap?
We had a prospect management meeting with our development team yesterday, and actually was really one of the interesting comments that came up from one of the colleges was the need to look at, as they said, bridging the gap. And we need to come up with a new or a different way to say that, because we don't think donors are going to love that. But here, it doesn't, definitely in the CSU, we know that we're going to be facing some budget cuts across the board, and that's going to mean that programs are probably going to need to find different ways to fund things to maintain quality for our students. So I think that is one of the things we may start looking at as we move forward in transition away from the emergency funds, which honestly on my campus, I've got a mailing going out next month asking for money for the emergency funds, but with the CARES Act money, I've been told some of our emergency funds have been shut down. I'm not even sure how they're going to administer those funds now.
Yeah, I know our emergency fund was established back in the recession of 2008. So it was already in place, which I think allows us a little more flexibility with things. But that's a really good point. The CARES Act is kind of that unknown component of all of this. And I've heard that one of the reasons why we haven't heard exactly what our budget cuts are going to look like is because we're still waiting to see if there's more federal funding coming to higher education that will determine what things look like. So that is an unknown component. Jill, I have a mailing going out next week as well. And we kind of did a combo. I don't love doing mailings like this, but it felt in these times it was better to be all encompassing. And so we hit the general fund, we hit college general funds, and then we also talk about all those COVID-19 initiatives. So it's kind of a throw everything on the wall and see what sticks mailing, and we'll see how it performs. But we have seen a lot of interest more in the funds or fundraising for things that are going to benefit students. We did try to do some program-based initiatives on our COVID-19 related page, and they're just not getting the traction. So I think with you, we're going to have to figure out that messaging of bridging the gap. They don't think that appeals to donors, and they think if you're going to have that program, you should have a way to pay for it. And so we're having to figure out how do we message that and what resonates with donors.
Jill, I'm remembering a slide that I used to use years and years ago of a mailing that had an outer envelope that had a glass of water that was 2/3 full. And it was a state university. It was so painfully worded, I had to completely white out the name of the institution. But the whole tone was they had just had their state funding cut. And therefore, it was you, the donor's responsibility to make that up. And I just worry that that's not a compelling message. I mean, everybody understands the reality of what we're trying to deal with, unprecedented. But just because it's our problem doesn't necessarily make it their problem, right? And I think talking about the needs and talking about the beneficiaries and anything other than the brutal math, it's probably better about bridging the gap. I'll have to go find that old slide.
And I think, for those who weren't in the fundraising space and higher education space back during the first recession in 2008, annual giving, I know from my standpoint, I was at UC San Diego at the time, and annual giving became that part that absorbed a lot of the major gift donors and absorbed those donors who were no longer at the spot where they could make the 10,000 plus or the 25,000 plus donations, but they gladly made an annual donation. And it might have been a little bit lower than what they usually made, but it was still a gift. So at that time, my annual giving numbers did not go down during the economic decline. It stayed pretty consistent with what we were seeing prior to that. So I think annual giving, we are in a pretty good spot. It's just all about how we message it and making sure that we don't come off tone deaf.
Yeah. Our old friend Aaron from the University of Hartford is listening in. Aaron, if you'd like, would you talk a little bit about your plans, sort of following along my point about our institutional needs not being the donor's problem? It sounds like Hartford's going to be sort of student-centric going forward. Are you there?
Yeah, yep. Here, thank you. Yeah, I mean, with our alumni and parents, we found that scholarship really speaks to them. We have a really high rate of first-generation students, especially the most recent class coming in. So I think, that need is only going to grow. And don't know right now what's going to happen with on-campus work for students. I know we have several in our office who, report things like text me daily. I'm like, I still don't know. I'm so sorry. But that's a source of income for a lot of them. So we're really just going to focus on that. We have a general scholarship fund that falls under our unrestricted or annual fund goal. So we can kind of work those concurrently. So we're just going to try to keep it really simple. The summer solicitation, I think, is going to be a signatory, either very young alum or maybe a junior in SGA, something like that, a student who has a little bit of an insider perspective, and hopefully can try to connect some dots for the reader on why this is so key right now.
Yeah, thanks for that. Torrey, it seems to me, generations of annual giving fundraisers have been all about planning and all about process, right? And all about messaging. And I don't think we've ever been on more shaky ground in terms of what assumptions you make about any of those things. And
exactly. I mean, I didn't do a mailing, and probably other schools are the same way. I didn't do a mailing till just now because I felt like things were changing so quickly that if I sent a mailing, by the time it hit mailboxes, it was going to be no longer relevant. And
Yeah.
so that's something that's kind of unheard of with annual giving. We do tend to be that group that can pivot the quickest, but I don't think anyone could pivot this quick unless you were leveraging primarily your crowdfunding or your online giving avenues that you could constantly be changing. But it is a unique space. And I think the other component is, for us, especially with our phone program, parents are the bread and butter of that giving. And we have not solicited parents since the beginning of this because I think their lives have been turned upside down with their students coming back home, a lot of them, or having to figure out different housing situations, having to move them, and then having to deal with them doing online learning. It's just a really tricky situation right now. So we're going to have to really think about the messaging to parents and how we make sure that we're acknowledging that this is a tough time and that this is a new reality for their students, but support's needed now more than ever. So I think that will be a really tricky aspect of this too, and how do we convey the need to parents without seeming insensitive to what they're experiencing with their children.
So speaking of that, do you want to get to your second poll?
Sure, yes, let's do it.
Here's what she's got teed up.
So will students be back on your campus this fall? Or at least is the goal right now to have students back?
Never assume with your polls.
Yes.
Yeah, as best we know, unless you don't know. This is just be grateful I learned how to run a poll, okay?
Yeah, and when I say hybrid, I should clarify that will mean that you will have some students will be back on campus, but not all classes will be in person. I should clarify that with hybrid. I think a lot of schools, I know the NCAA might have a say in this for a lot of schools, because I know back about 3 weeks ago, they had made the stance that to have sports, your students need to be on campus. So that could determine a lot of how our campuses move forward. But so it looks like it's definitely all over the board. Majority saying yes, students will be back. And then
as much as they know
is don't know. And I think that's a very realistic answer. I know I've heard I've seen that some schools back east are planning on starting a little earlier, and they will be done at Thanksgiving. So not having students return to campus after Thanksgiving, being that the concern is, you can kind of contain students once they're on your campus. There's not a lot of travel happening, but the minute you open up Thanksgiving, people go all over the country, and do you necessarily want them coming back?
Well, and that president of Notre Dame has been on every news talk show that I've seen in the last week. And even he says we're going under our best set of assumptions right now. It seems like that's the best schedule if we're on campus. Mm-hmm. But even he has said we're going to follow the health professionals and we're not going to put anybody in danger. But so far, he's sticking to his story. So Erin, back to your point about parents in particular as an audience, I think that hinges an awful lot on this question, doesn't it? That if we head into another distance learning environment, even a hybrid environment, do people start questioning the value of this proposition? And does that somehow impact their enthusiasm about giving, and even maybe our reluctance to ask for a gift? I don't know the answers to those either, but I could imagine that being a big variable.
Yeah, because I think how we talk to students, or how we talk to, whether it's alumni, parents, friends, our donors, will vary greatly on what our campus looks like in the fall. And I know in the mailing I just included, I did include a quote from our president about his goal for fall and what he hopes fall will look like. But again, we had to caveat that with, this is our hope, this is our goal, but nobody really knows if that will be a reality. Even with planning for our phone program and having those students back, I'm taking measurements with a tape measure of our phone program call center to see what does that look like? How many square feet do we have? Because I think we saw one recommendation that you should really have 3 people per a 200 square foot space. So I'm having to look at how big is my call center. And then we're also going to test out, I'm going to campus tomorrow to test out what does the phone system sound like with a mask on? Because I don't know if we can have our callers without masks. Those are all things that we have to think about. And we also have to think about how do we include that in our messaging? Because we can have a lot of upset people if everything is still online and they're still paying tuition. So
But
just,
at least they're perceptions, right? I mean, it's
Yes.
all what sort of a value do they think they're getting or not?
yeah. And especially for those science-based and lab-based programs, that's a huge component of a lot of students' curriculum. And if they need to have those labs in order to graduate. And so that's one of our goals, is to be able to have those be in person. Of course, still adhering to the social distancing guidelines. So yeah, the point of that question was just to see how will this affect what we do going forward. And it's something to think about, because I think we need to all have plans for all scenarios. And if anyone has started working on those plans, feel free to share what that will look like for you guys.
Yeah, as if this job wasn't complicated enough. Have a scenario for all scenarios. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And be ready to pivot at a moment's notice.
By next week.
And the other wild card with that is athletics. I know our alumni, our results vary greatly on a Sunday if our football team won or lost on the Saturday before. And so how will athletics affect what we do in annual giving? If there's no sports, or if there's no fans, or if it's a reduced schedule, or if the season is now in spring, that could really change things for us. So we definitely, people are starting to chime in here a little bit. Jill, I just saw your question about enrollment expectations. I know for us right now, summer enrollment is on par, if not possibly outpacing normal, because I think students are at home. There's not a lot going on socially, so why not get some classes knocked out via summer school? So our summer enrollment is pretty high. And I thought the last I heard is our fall enrollment is right where we expected. It's in that 95% and up range. So fall enrollment is looking pretty on par. I don't know if that is also because students who maybe have been going, local students who were attending colleges out of state, if they're now coming back and transferring to school closer to home. I'm not sure where that's coming from. So yeah, that's a good question about what enrollment looks like.
You know, there's a parent comment from Pat, who's at Eastern Washington, I think, and is an old FundList friend. And Pat, if you want to talk about the point you made, that you're actually seeing some success with parents, I'd mostly just like to see you and say hi in addition. But are you there? And you want to say a little bit about what you're seeing with parents?
I am here, Bob.
Hi.
How's it going?
All right. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Good to see everyone. Yeah, actually, part of my job is leadership, annual giving. And so I'm having some great conversations with parents. You know, I was a little leery about sending them anything, including them in things. And I guess it's that old adage in annual giving that if you don't ask people, they don't give. And if you assume that you know what their answer is going to be, you're going to be wrong. And so we just kept including them, and we're actually getting some good feedback that now more than ever they do understand with their students being at home, and they have what they need to succeed. They have the right laptops, the internet access, everything that they need, and they're struggling doing online courses because they prefer classroom instruction. So then they start thinking, oh my gosh, what about those students who we're appealing to them about, the ones who can't afford laptops that we are furnishing for them due to our student emergency fund. So they are giving. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid to ask them. It's how you message it, how you tell the story.
Don't say no for anybody. Right.
Exactly.
Rule number one. Thank you for that, and
Yeah.
glad that you're here. I bet we might even be back to you. Hey, Aaron, I don't know if you were in the Facebook chat we had yesterday. You must have been quiet, otherwise we would have dragged you into it. But you're making a point in the chat about how you're kind of restricting yourself to Facebook messages to parents, actually paid ads to current parents. So I'm guessing that must be a customized list, right? And yesterday there were some, the anxious folk who worry about the perception that we're somehow, sharing private data, in this case with parents, with Facebook. I mean, I look around, I see every other advertiser in the world not that concerned about it, including, vendors that we all work with in our business. So it doesn't seem like it's a problem for you. Tell me what I should tell these people that get in my face about it.
Sure. So, well, first of all, we're trying to email people a little less out of our office, or not less, but more strategically. We want to be a little more thoughtful about it. The 7 schools and colleges that we have, in addition to athletics, we did one of those giant donor communication journeys, and we got halfway through the list and we're just like, all right, we're done. Like, this is clearly too many already. And believe it or not, we just started our family giving program 2 years ago, have developed some great volunteers, and they keep us in the loop on what's being said in one of the non-official parent groups that has formed on Facebook. So I feel like we have a pretty decent read on what the murmurs are. So our solution, or thing we were going to try, is doing the targeted ads. We're just going to use the emails we have in our system and hope that there's a large portion that are their primary emails that they use for Facebook. I know I personally use a very old email, so who knows what the actual accuracy will be. But we feel like even though it's targeted, it's actually less aggressive than an email that comes directly to you in your inbox that you click to open. So even though it's more direct, it's actually feels a little less direct. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But this is the first time we're going to do it, so we'll see.
Well, and I don't ever want to be insensitive to anybody's data privacy concerns, but if you've got a parent focus group who's saying, what's the big deal? Or, I look around and see all kinds of folks showing up in my sponsored posts newsfeed, and it's always intriguing to me to learn a little bit about how I got in their radar in the first place. So maybe it's just something that diminishes as a concern over time, but it certainly seems like a very smart, precise way to use an additional channel like you guys are. All right, Torrey, back to you. I'm waiting for you to ask about everybody's budget.
Yes, I think let's chat budget. So we kind of I think we can wait on that poll question, but
sure.
The budget's going to be a big concern, right? I think a lot of us don't even know what our budget cuts are going to be. I've been told to kind of plan for best case scenario 15%, worst case scenario 25%, somewhere in the middle. We don't know yet what that will look like, but I think all of us are probably having to plan for some type of budget cut. And so what does that look like for our programs? I know annual giving, we've all diversified so much in the last few years where we have a lot of channels. It's not just phone and direct mail anymore. It's phone, direct mail, crowdfunding, texting, thank you, or video, and you also might have email in there and all sorts of things. So how do we ensure that we continue being able to leverage all of these channels, but also do it in a cost-effective way? I know right now, my annual giving coordinator and myself, we're having those discussions about our phone program and how that's one of the most significant parts of my budget, because not only do you have the infrastructure involved with that, but also all the student salaries. And we are still planning on employing those students. They are still getting their standard pay increase for the semester for retention reasons. So, but how do we make that channel be more effective? And is it having the students start texting? Is it having them doing wellness calls and stewardship calls, and also having asks in there, but the asks look a lot different this year. And then I know targeted mailings are really what we've all transitioned to, but there's an added cost with those targeted mailings, right? Because you have so many different lists and all this variable data and different letters. And so are we now kind of back to more all-encompassing mailings and getting that cost savings from there, but at least something's still going out? Are we leveraging our crowdfunding channels more?
Torrey, is a little bit of a bystander to this conversation. The thing that I am interested in seeing develop is sort of that existential question that, what we do in our shops, we're one of the few offices on campus that generates revenue. So is that necessarily an area to be cut, or are we making some decisions and reaching some conclusions about people's diminished philanthropic state of mind? And so it'd be interesting to see, and that's where I'm interested in anything anybody wants to share. Do you get dragged down with a lot of this across the board cutting? Is there any exception that you perceive being made because we are a gift income generating department in the organizational chart? I'm not sure everybody knows exactly how that's going to play out, but I'm very interested to see if you guys have it just as bad as everybody else.
Well, and I think it's a good point too to see, it probably a lot of it depends on how big and robust is your annual giving department. I know at our institution, we are as lean and mean as we can get. There's 2 of us. So there's not a lot of, in terms of, if we're looking at layoffs, there's not a lot of room for that. But in terms of budget cuts, I think there's always ways that you can make things more efficient, right? There's always little tweaks that you can do, but do they move the needle enough? And that's a great question. Like where are we anticipating those cuts to come down at the development level? I know where I worked during the recession in 2008, we did have cuts in development because we had just completed a campaign. So we were pretty robustly staffed at that time to finish that big campaign. So I think it probably will depend on what your programs look like right now. And are you really staffed up, or are you have a lot of openings right now?
Hey, Jill, I know the CSUs made that announcement that they were going to sort of stay online with academics. Have they made any other statements about budgets, or is that all still shaken out?
The rumor I'm hearing is we can probably expect at least a 10% cut. I don't know that's to my budget.
Yeah.
Everything's rumors right now, but and they're working with the unions at the chancellor's office level, is my understanding. What I have been told is the unions are not going to accept pay cuts, but that they said that they will accept a furlough. So I'm sort of expecting that we may be looking. That's kind of my gut feeling right now. But until they've got everything straightened out with the unions, that's what I think might be coming down the line.
Yeah. Just speaking from my point of view, putting on a couple of conferences a year, there's an irony in this for me, in that an online conference is a whole lot cheaper than an in-person conference with all the food and beverage and everything else. My point is that our alumni relations friends certainly seem to be in a very interesting decision-making process at the moment, because you can do a lot more Zoom alumni things, I think, for the same budget as in-person get-togethers that might not even be allowed to happen still anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fascinating to me what that budget discussion is like, and what that amended sort of request might be going forward. And even though our channels, I think, don't change a whole lot. I mean, you can talk about remote calling versus your student calling room versus Aaron's tape measure for the phone-a-thon stations, but in a way, it still seems like we're more or less in the same lanes, but that doesn't mean everybody in the division is the same, for sure.
Well, and I think like a good point to that too is, I know travel, for instance, we're saving budgets by not having a lot of people out traveling right now. And I think those travel restrictions will probably continue for a while. So that will continue to be a savings. The events budgets, that events aren't happening and they won't be happening to that magnitude for a while. So there are some cost savings there. So I think where I'm looking at more of kind of the budget cuts is programmatically things probably I'm hoping will stay on par, but it's those, unfortunately, those conferences, the travel, the stewardship type pieces, or the thank you things that we might, tokens that we might send out. That's where the cuts are going to be for sure.
Pat, I love your comment that you've resorted to asking other development people to ask for annual giving when they're out talking to people. Is there any more to the situation that's developing there in addition to that?
Well, I think everybody is sympathetic and they think I'm going to drop dead any day. But when I was at the Case District 8 conference in January, I'm on the Case District 8 board, and I got a call during that from my assistant director that she was leaving February 7th. And so I came back from the conference. We had 1 week together. She bailed, and then we had a hiring freeze because of COVID. So it's been tragic, and but you know, we're keeping things afloat, we're keeping things going, moving ahead. And so luckily the philanthropy team, we're under the same AVP, and so she said, step it up, everybody, remember annual giving in your asks, and you know, don't let us fail there, because it is the beginning of the pipeline and we got to keep it going, and all of that. So yeah, we're figuring it out.
Pat, does Eastern Washington have a separate alumni association, and any idea of how their life is impacted? You might even be part of them. I don't know, but
yeah,
is that?
We used to have alumni advancement, which was alumni relations and annual giving, and then 2 years ago we broke that up, and so then I became the director of annual giving, and we have a separate director of alumni relations. Actually, we joined those two during the Great Recession. And so then things were looking good enough that we went, oh, we don't need to have that together anymore. We can have two directors, which has been much easier, but we still work very closely together. And they, luckily, there was a transition point where I was interim director of alumni advancement. And so I was able to talk the annual giving talk with the alumni board. And they're all on board now of understanding the importance of annual giving. So they're out there preaching the gospel for us. So it's great. Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Pat, we're in a similar, we've kind of stressed that too to our major gift officers, that, you know, if someone's not at that ability to make that major gift, or they're not comfortable with it right now, make sure to do the plug for annual giving, because they might be willing to do that level of giving.
Yeah. And I think that does give, it releases a lot of pressure, especially at times like this, for them and for the donors. So I think it's a great message all the way around.
And it keeps them engaged and keeps them as a donor, so that we're not having to reactivate them at some point, for sure.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I think the budget discussion is going to be something that continues throughout the summer, and we'll probably have more questions as the summer unfolds and what it all looks like. So one question that keeps coming up, and I know that we didn't really get a chance to talk about this channel much in our last discussion, was this texting channel. And it seems to be a pretty cost-effective channel, depending on how vendors are pricing or what your price model looks like. But we have a poll question to see if your annual giving program is currently using texting.
And here it comes.
It's the newest kind of channel that's making its way through all of our programs. So if it's yes, you have it, no, you don't, or it's in the works. And it's seeming like it's all across the board again.
Yeah, but that's probably more texting than you would have seen a year ago, for sure.
100%. And I know for us, one thing that really started the conversation was that is a thing that channel that maybe our leadership does feel comfortable allowing students to do remotely. I don't know how comfortable we are with students calling and asking for money remotely, but texting seems to be something that we could do if students were not returning to work. And so that's what kind of started the discussion for us is, it's really easy to send a text as a quick, checking in on you. Do you have any questions at this time? How are things going? Are you interested in supporting our COVID-19 related initiatives? I think texting in some ways seems less intrusive too than a phone call, because you can respond whenever you want versus having to pick up at that moment. And so texting is definitely something that we are looking into and hoping to add into our program for this year. I did budget for it, even with accounting for a budget cut. I still was able to get in the hopes to have a texting vendor of some sort. I know a lot of the calling vendors are starting to incorporate texting into their platforms. So if you are leveraging that, would love to know how you're leveraging it and if you're using it more as a stewardship tool or a true solicitation tool, and how that has been going. I know for us, we're looking at it as a way that it can be used by multiple areas. It can be used by our alumni association. It can be used by our events team. Even athletics might need to use it at times to communicate messaging. So yeah, would love to hear. I see that Noah and Courtney both are leveraging texting.
Torrey, just to throw in a couple of things. Pat and some of my friends who get to case district conferences and the ones that I'm a part of, it's interesting. You go into the exhibit hall every year and you can kind of get the pulse of what's percolating among products out there. And, if a vendor didn't think that they could have success with us as a prospect group, they wouldn't show up in the first place. So you can really see the tipping point, I think, where texting has become an important part of the conversation, where 10 years ago, I think we talked ourselves out of it a lot. I think we were thinking of texting just from broadcasting and sort of spamming people. And now we found, these one-to-one platforms that I think are resonating more. Plus, I think there's many ways to use texting. Is it a way to receive gifts? Is it a way to communicate with, lapsing donors? And I think the fact that it's become more dynamic is what's put it back on the table. Torrey and I should mention, we're not in cahoots with any text platform, but we do think it's becoming a really frequent conversation about that channel as a part of what we do. So I'm seeing people chime in with who their preferred providers are. There's some Hustle folks out there. Get Through is another one I see a lot, and Through Text I think is part of them. So whatever your preference, but I do think that's another way to leverage the student calling team, right? If you still have one. I see a lot of year-end fundraising activities around now where the development staff itself is sometimes sending text messages to specific people just because there's that ticking clock and won't you help us hit our goal and yada, 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 right?
Definitely. Yeah, and I'm seeing, people put on there that they've used it primarily either for their giving days or as an engagement and stewardship, but in this current situation they're in now, leveraging it for fundraising and how that will work and how people are responding to that. It's definitely, I know from, even if you think about your own personal, how you interact, and if I get a call from a number I don't know, I don't necessarily respond, but if I get a text, I can at least see what they're wanting and where they're coming from. So it does kind of open up that ability to reach out to people who typically wouldn't even pick up the phone. And it gives something for our callers to do if we're not necessarily going back into our traditional call centers. And I know for most of the texting platforms, all you need access to is the internet and a computer. And so that is, you don't need phone lines, you don't need any of that stuff. So it definitely is something that students can do remotely and staff can do remotely.
In the same way that Erin is dipping her toe in the pool with Facebook, and places are playing with texting more and just finding the right way to use it in a way that doesn't annoy people. I don't think going forward, it's going to be enough to just say, well, we tried to reach people all the usual ways and we just didn't get a hold of anybody. Argue your limitations and they will be your limitations, right? And so I think anything is sort of fair game. It's much more complicated than when I was a boy doing this with my mail and my phone, right? But I think it rewards the programs that are willing to think creatively about how to blend all these channels and all these tools into what we're doing.
Definitely. And I think for us too, we've been looking at it for more on to benefit or to go in tandem with the crowdfunding projects as well, because especially with those student groups, if your debate team is doing a crowdfunding project, you can bring them in and say, okay, here's this platform, send out your text to all your contacts. And that's a little less intimidating than having students call. I think a lot of this generation is a little afraid of the phone. And so texting is more natural for them. And so I think with the crowdfunding components, it will be really interesting to see how texting helps enhance those.
Let me just say, I'm looking at one of the comments. There's an old friend of mine listening in by the name of Joe Ferraro, who I haven't seen in a long time. He's almost as old as me. And Joe, you have a comment to make that I think is important here about part of this conversation depends on the value that your institution puts on annual giving and the annual fund. Are you there, and do you want to elaborate on that? It'd be great to hear your voice.
Yeah, I am here, Bob.
How are you?
It's great it's definitely great to see you again. It's been a while. I've been regrettably in a few situations where leadership doesn't value annual fund a whole lot and values major gifts and foundations and events a whole lot more. So I think regardless, the question what I was posing was really having the buy-in of leadership and finding that right fit will probably be the thing that determines more than anything else if you're asked to make a cut on an income producing side, meaning on the fundraising side. So that was kind of where that was coming from, that point of view, because regrettably that's happened more than once.
Yeah, well, and you're preaching to the choir with this bunch, I suspect, Joe, but it's exactly right. And it's, this reminds me of situations we've gone through like this in years past that we would both be familiar with, where you can't just assume that everybody appreciates the value of annual giving, right? And the things that we do identifying prospects and just introducing the idea of annual giving and the reliability that we've built up with a lot of our donors, that they will keep showing up every year, that we do graduate people into major gift conversations. And so, I don't ever assume that everybody on the board or everybody in the leadership appreciates all that sort of door opening and seed planting and stuff that gets done in our shop. And it's easy just to look at the bottom line.
There really is a mindset in some places of not believing the pipeline exists and not believing it to build a foundation that you can just find your millionaires tomorrow out of nowhere. And
send the proposal to Bill Gates, right?
Right, exactly.
And Joe, you also commented that you're leveraging the texting for fundraising right now with year-end giving and the COVID-19 emergency funds. How is that?
Yeah, we used through text. We used through text, and we started last year with a very, very small test. And then our donor survey, which was fantastic. Response rate on doing a donor survey and a brand new donor survey, there were two different ones, and an alumni survey. The response to people saying they would take 5 minutes, and it was just a survey monkey. And it was of the people we actually had a connection to and got our first response, because the way through text works is it's really open, and at least we design it to be very open-ended and ask a question to get engagement as opposed to come out with a blast, and they're all individual communications. And it worked well for that first primary test, but it was a very friendly audience. The second test was the surveys. We ended up getting a number of gifts through that. But then most recently, we blew the doors off and did a ton of text number finds to do lookups. And so it expanded our universe.
Do we lose Joe?
I think he's
a
cutting
good
in and
amount
out.
of
Joe, your budget cuts might
I
have
was very
hurt.
successful research and testing for COVID because I
Yep. It was good hearing from Joe.
Yes. And maybe he can send us an email about how that all worked out with the testing.
Yeah,
I'm curious for
excellent.
sure.
No, thanks for that, Joe. Sorry, the budget cuts are hitting the bandwidth over there, apparently. Torrey, you're doing great. Any last things you want to hit
Yeah,
on?
just kind of two topics. A few people had emailed me about some discussion topics, and one of them was more on the stewardship and thank you side of things. I don't think we'll have time to cover that today, but I'll do a quick plug for our friend Lynn Wester. She's doing Facebook Lives every Wednesday at 1 o'clock Pacific, and she does talk a lot about stewardship, thank you, and the donor relation sides of things. So I definitely suggest you to go check those out. And then I also wanted to just give, if Jill wanted to chime in or talk at all about the unique situation with the CSUs. Don't want to put you on the spot, Jill, but if there's anything that you wanted to add, by all means, because I know that that was definitely, I think that was a driving force for a lot of our institutions to either come up with a game plan or to really start thinking about things once we heard what the CSU decision was.
Well, so and Jill, for anybody who doesn't know, the CSUs were one of the first state university systems to already announce they're going to be completely online with student coursework this fall, right? You know, which starts to put next year's meeting of the minds in question, I think, already, right? But yeah, I'm not leaving anything out there, am I?
Well, I was going to comment at the very beginning that in addition to the hand sanitizer, maybe you should start talking to Barbara now about face masks.
Yes.
Um,
Some branded face masks, for sure.
Yeah, I think things are really still kind of up in the air. I mean, it's very interesting. My campus is pretty mum about anything that's happening. I'm getting most of my information from my colleagues on some other campuses or the chancellor's office. Go figure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're having some conversations, and we are having a conversation with our group tomorrow. And I think we're going to continue like we are with this group, some of those conversations, because I think a lot of it is just up in the air. I know for me, my campus is very, very security risk adverse. And the fact that I'm even mentioning the idea that we might have students remotely is ruffling all sorts of feathers. The CSU is the California State University system. We are one of the largest systems in the country, and we're made up of 23 campuses here in California. We are different from the UC system. For those of you that don't know, the UC system, I'm going to misquote this. I think there are 10 campuses in the UC system, and they are research based. There are 23 campuses in the CSU system. We are teaching based, meaning we don't, well, with very few exceptions, we don't award PhDs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know, and Jill, is Cal State LA the largest within the system, or?
No, definitely not. We're between 20 and 23,000 students. I can't remember. Long Beach, San Diego.
I think San Diego might.
Yeah, are much larger.
Yeah, and I know for us, the implication was that 3 of the CSUs are within our athletic conference. And so we've been having a lot of those discussions with how that decision will affect athletics.
Yeah, you know, we're Division II, and a week or so ago, our conference said that there would be no competition in the fall. I think that may be a little up in the air now. So, you know, everything still changes daily.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I think going to just be what our reality is for the next few months. I know we're starting to plan what does the return to campus look like, not only for students, but for employees, and when is that time frame? I know right now I'm planning on being back sometime in July, hopefully the first week of July. But I think things are just changing constantly. We're all going to have to pivot and continue to come up with new plans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else that anyone wanted to chime in quickly before we're at the hour, or that you wanted to touch on? Just put a chat in and we can unmute you and we can have a.
Is there anything anybody needs therapy about right away? You can wait for a little while? Okay. Hang in there, man. I've never seen anything like it, just in terms of not knowing what the fundraising methods are going to be, not knowing what the fundraising budget's going to be, not knowing what the fundraising audience is going to be capable or incapable of, or their perception, and what our core mission, what our core product as institutions is even going to be in the short term. So solve for that, but think about all contingencies.
Yeah.
As Torrey says, plan for everything.
Plan for it all. And then just a quick plug, we are doing a phone-a-thon discussion on June 3rd. And then I believe, Bob, you're doing a student philanthropy one the next day, right?
Yeah, with I think it's Ariel Coates from California Lutheran University. And we have a big crowd coming for that one. And so yeah, stay tuned. The phone-a-thon one's going to be quite interesting because it wasn't that long ago where the idea of like virtual calling or kids calling from their homes would have even been thought about as a possibility. And then RNL said, wait a minute, we can do it. VanillaSoft jumped in and said, we can do it. I forget, there's at least 2 more providers in there too that are now saying, yes, please, we'll do that.
I know Blackbaud Guided Fundraising is doing it. And then I've heard Leads, and I haven't heard much with the Wilson Bennett space, so if anyone's using them, would love to hear how they're, because that's the only one I haven't heard a lot about right now. I heard a new one called Jammer the other day that I'd never heard of. So the plan for the phone-a-thon discussion on next Wednesday is to have someone that a couple schools talk about, if they're doing remote calling, if they're doing outside calling, if they have students in, if they're calling now, if they're doing wellness, and have the whole variety of different scenarios so that we can learn from each of those different.
Yeah. So between what do you think of the phone-a-thon these days in general versus what technology could you use to even do remote calling if you wanted to versus the things like PCI compliance and everything else? I mean, we weren't thinking about any of that really when the meeting of the minds happened, and now it's sort of all in play. I blame the CSUs for not bringing people back to campus. For necessitating this conversation.
We call him Eric Garcetti, Eric Garcetti and Gavin Newsom. Please direct your complaints there.
Yeah, well done. All right, Torrey, thanks for another good chat. Thanks everybody. For everybody we imposed on, thanks for letting us bend your ear and bend our ear. See you again somewhere soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.